For many decades, education in Malaysia has been and still is in distress. The students are not only facing poor quality and low standard education, but also have not been given fair opportunity to develop to their fullest potentials, lacking exposure and competitive ability at the international level. The Ministry of Education employs about 550,000 employees, including about 420,000 school teachers, and an annual expenditure budget of 50.4 billion ringgit 2021 to carry out and implement a centralized education system for all the national schools in Malaysia. By any standard of management, the Malaysia Education Department is a huge organisation, yet we suffer poor and falling standards. Education is about acquiring knowledge, facilitating innovation and free thinking among other things. Yet over the last 60 years, the Malaysian education have been obscured by political, religious and racial ideologies, creating narrow-mindedness among students. The education system has undergone numerous reforms and flip-flop changes, forcing students to take many courses in order to cater to political and religious demands. As a result, there is simply not enough time and resources in educating to learn reading, mathematics and science subjects. In addition, being deprived of English language learning since 1st January 1970, students are deprived of easy access to learning interaction with the rest of the world. Poor quality and falling standard. In spite of huge manpower and large expenditures, Malaysia education is poor quality and low in standard. The poor quality of Malaysia's education system is more worrying than the level of debt in its households, say the World Bank senior economist Dr. Federico Gil-Sander. Dr. Federico Gil-Sander further said that Malaysians should be alarmed that their children were doing worse in school than children in Vietnam, a country that is poorer than Malaysia. In 2012, the Programme for International Student Assessment (PISA) reported that Malaysian students ranked 52nd out of 65 countries behind Vietnam, which ranked 17th. In PISA 2015, Malaysian students again ranked 52nd out of 76 countries, and in PISA 2018, Malaysian students' ranking dropped to 59th position with scores below average across the board. It is clear that the Malaysian education standard is getting from bad to worse. Yet the Malaysia Education Performance Standard is being set at an increasingly lower academic level, while the number of students receiving perfect A scores in the National Public Examination has been on the increase. This gives a false impression that our students are performing better and better. This is just living in self-denial and self-defeating in purpose. The same low quality is seen in the institutions of higher learning. University Malaya, as the top university in Malaysia, ranked number 301 by the Times Higher Education ranking in 2020. In comparison, the National University of Singapore is ranked number 25 and the University of Hong Kong at number 35. Unfair opportunity in higher learning. For many years, the entry of students into local universities is subject to racial quotas and not based on meritocracy. As a result, many students are accorded unequal opportunities. In fact, for fear of non-selection for their courses and coupled with an increasingly lower standard of education and lack of proficiency in English, many parents are forced to send their children to independent private schools or overseas universities and paying expensive fees, resulting in the depletion of their life savings and burdened with heavy borrowings. Once their children are educated overseas and after having found employment there, they are not returning to their home state. If this was not brain drain, what is it? For so long and so many poorly equipped and dilapidated schools. In Sarawak, out of the 1,454 schools, 1,020 are in dilapidated condition, of which 415 are extremely critical. Many are without proper boarding hostels and basic necessities such as clean water and electricity, not to mention a dire lack of basic internet connectivity. GPS has been talking about resolving it and making announcements and promises, but yet, so many dilapidated schools still remain. In Sarawak, the majority of our schools are not equipped with the proper hardware and software to meet the needs of modern teaching. Lacking in higher education. Malaysian local universities and technical training in higher education are still trailing in meeting industrial needs, as well as lagging behind their peers at international levels. There is also a lack of focus on R&D, as well as a greater emphasis on science development agenda. Lack of bilingual skills. The lack of bilingual skills, especially in English proficiency, is hampering students and institutions alike in their ability to have free access and communication with academic bodies around the world. Lack of cultural and traditional ethnicity teaching. With so much emphasis by peninsular politicians in the federal government preaching on Malaysianization, the ethnic culture and traditions of Sarawakians and our identities are diminishing in presence and recognition in our own homeland. Some of the indigenous legacies, languages and cultural practices are in danger of being marginalized if not obliterated. The importance of culture and traditions of Sarawakians is not emphasized and conveniently excluded in the mainstream Malaysia agenda and in the education of history of the country. All schools and teachers are not treated equally. The vernacular schools, example, the Chinese independent schools, kindergartens and nurseries, and their teachers and staff are not being treated equally for their contribution toward national building in education. Every time the government makes a grant to these institutions of learning, politicians propagate that it's a favour of their kindness. Education failures cannot be tolerated anymore. For too long, and since the 1970s, our education system has been obscured by political, religious and racial ideologies. There were numerous reforms and flip-flop changes, bogged down by an inefficient and humongous centralized educational organisation. The Malaysian education system has become out of pace and unable to compete at the international level. As a result, the standard of education in Malaysia is suffering from poor quality and deteriorating at a shamefully alarming rate. Even in the hardware aspects of school buildings, equipment, boarding facilities and basic utilities such as electricity, water and internet connection, we are facing dilapidation and lacking for so long. The education failures under GPS being in government are so fundamental that we cannot and must not tolerate them any longer. Have pity on our children and their children in the future. Let education be solely for the purpose of excelling in the acquiring of knowledge, facilitating innovation and free thinking on par with international standards. PSB is truly an independent Sarawak party. It is time to change the GPS government of over 50 years and so many failures. PSB is the rising sun of Sarawak, a party of hope for a better future of education for our children in Sarawak. The end is here for GPS. The hope of the future by the rising sun is here.